Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fiscal Focus at DawnNews English. I'm your host, Danish Khan, and today we're going to talk about US elections 2024. And to talk about this, I'm joined by Syed Muhammad Ali. He's lecturer at Johns Hopkins University, and he teaches courses related to international relations. Thank you, Ali, for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I want to start with your reaction on the recent US general elections. Were you surprised of the outcome?
I personally was not too surprised. I mean, I just this morning, dropping my kids off, I saw one of my neighbors who was very disappointed, and I was saying, while I see, the various sort of implications that this will, and the concerns that this brings to the fore, especially for more liberal Americans. I mean, I was just noting that the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, they play out at the domestic front, but as far as the foreign policy arena goes, there's not much of a difference. So I was seeing this kind of morose sense of consistency that we might perhaps see. So I was not too surprised. I mean, that there is this sense of despondency, I suppose, but that despondency had been lingering from earlier as well for me.
Yeah, coming from Global South, being in the US, we have that dialectical approach of seeing local and international, and that gives a more broader perspective. So, how do you interpret these results? Like, tell us from a more political economy perspective, what are some key insights from this outcome?
Danish, if you look at, those seven key swing states, as they were called, right? Like Nevada, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Michigan, Georgia, and Arizona. Out of these, a couple of states are still sort of the results are not officially announced, but it looks that they might go President Trump's way, and he has won the five other states. Now, these are the states where where you kind of see the angst of the working class, right? And how President Trump has been able to, with his varied forms of messaging, his rhetoric, his populist rhetoric, has managed to convince the ethnic minorities, as well as sort of the majority. I mean, particularly the young white male voter, to align themselves with him and see more hope in him. So that was where this battle was being fought, or so sort of states that have conventionally aligned with either the Dems or the Republicans. And this, one was expecting that there might be some pushback because the Harris campaign had lavished a lot of, they'd thrown a lot of money at this race. But despite all of that, that was a clear sweep. And that was a bit of a surprise for me as well.
Yeah, the exit polls results show that the economy was one of the most important issues for voters. And it seems like inflation has really impacted the way people have voted. So tell us more about that economic landscape in the US and why economy was such an important issue for voters.
Well, I mean, we have to think back to the pandemic. I mean, pre-pandemic, the American economy was doing great. It has recovered. I mean, if you look at sort of the economic performance of the Biden administration, they have significantly curbed inflation, barring perhaps food inflation. But the sort of the it was the messaging, and I mean, people going to the grocery stores, and a lot of people were hoping that there'd be a further reduction in the prices of gasoline. And immigration and inflation were those two key issues that really, yeah, the if you look at sort of the role of the Fed, for instance, right? So I mean, the Fed had raised interest rates, to try and bring inflation under control. And that in turn is linked, to the housing market. So, I mean, for us, I mean, we are also like in a haylock, locked in a haylock, a loan that you get for, doing reconstruction. And we're getting, the interest rate we got was also something like 8 or 9%. I mean, that's what we're paying off now. And those interest rates will come down. And I mean, if you think as it is, there's a scarcity of housing, and young people who are stepping into the workforce don't want a significant chunk of their salary going towards rent, and they want to be first-time home buyers. For them, it has really been unaffordable to get a house. And that is something that for the middle class here, hardworking people, for them, that sort of American dream of being independent, stepping out into the world, they are the ones who were feeling this most intensely. And now with the Fed and its autonomy, I mean, it made economic sense for the Fed to sort of, to try and exert this kind of fiscal control. And now it remains to be seen what President Trump is going to do about it. I mean, he's indicated that, he might want to exert more influence over the Fed as well, which has, set alarm bells ringing, because a politician, and particularly a politician of President Trump's persuasion, who can be quite inconsistent, in terms of economic planning, if he now, starts exerting pressure on the Fed and tries to undermine the Fed, that could have very serious implications for the existing global order, which is lopsided in any case.
Yeah. I mean, you made important points about how working people are being impacted. So historically, or especially in the last like few decades or since Second World War, it was Democratic Party was seen to be more pro-working class. But now if you notice, Trump rallies, there were more working class people among Trump supporters. So how did this change happen? And now Democratic Party is framed as maybe a party of elites, whereas the Republican Party, especially that MAGA Republican Party, is seen more as a working class, especially white working class party.
Well, this is the genius of particularly of President Trump, but there is a longer history to it. So, I mean, if we go back, to the Keynesian style economic architecture and Keynesian style economics, where the government would play a more proactive role in the economy. And here I'm thinking, back to the days of the New Deal, where the government invested in infrastructure, created job opportunities. Even Ford and the T model cars that he started manufacturing using the assembly line. Yes, it sort of undermined the capacity of the capacity and the position of an individual worker, because it brought in monotony. It made a worker was made sort of easily replaceable because he was just performing one singular function. But at the same time, that worker was being paid well, was getting a decent wage, so he could actually afford a T model car. Right. So, I mean, so from that kind of economic thinking, we slowly saw the advent of neoliberalism, right? And the rise of corporate culture. And you started seeing corporations then using things like offshoring, outsourcing, in the bid to raise their own profits and going into these other economies of the global south. This race to the bottom of the barrel, lax legislation around labor, around environmental regulations, and they started making more exorbitant profits. And as a consequence of that, you saw the blue collar worker here, feeling increasingly disgruntled and marginalized. And, now if we sort of move forward a little, I mean, Jimmy Carter was still, as a Democrat, had progressive, progressive elements within his administration. But come Clinton, the first Clinton administration, you really saw an attempt in the US and also coincidentally in the UK, you saw an attempt, with the Labour moving to the center and the Dems here, the Democrats here in the US also moving to the center, thinking that they would, woo the some of the centrist vote within the US. But what happened in both these countries was that the conservatives moved further right. So, you saw the Republicans, started talking about, sort of their stance on migration, on a host of other issues, becoming similar to what the fringe Tea Party used to talk about. And simultaneously, there was this, there was this idea of social mobility. You work hard, you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, you ignore the sort of the systemic injustices built into the economic system. But as long as you work hard, you go to a good school, you will do well. And that did happen, in the Clinton era. You had, I mean, the Clintons themselves went to the Ivy Leagues, got the them and many others like them, got the $500,000 jobs, working for big corporations and became the successful corporate lawyers. And they helped further, cross the T's and dot the I's, as they say, right? So what they did was they enabled big business to, to really, through lobbying efforts and through a variety of tactics, to really, foolproof create a foolproof system where their vested interests could be protected through legislation, and that myth of social mobility within the US began to erode. And then comes in populism, and how populists, here in the US and elsewhere, they use that disgruntlement and they use it, to start talking about issues around identity, around migrants. So rather than saying that, it is the fault of big business that is suppressing your salaries, and there's now a difference. Back in the day, in the 50s or 60s, if you were CEO of a major corporation, well-running business, you'd probably make 50 times the salary of an ordinary worker. Now, it's exponential. There's an exponential difference between what someone who's working for Amazon is making and, the corporate high-ups within Amazon. So that kind of disgruntlement has been used, and it's been given this twist of identity politics. So it's not the fault of big business, it's the fault of the blue collar worker. We're pitting one blue collar worker against another. So it's the fault of the Mexican, it's the fault of the Chinese who are stealing your jobs. Right. And that has been done quite successfully. And that is why, we perhaps see this shift because of identity politics, where, you have a multi-millionaire or perhaps a billionaire, saying that he's going to drain the swamp.
Yes. So it seems like on the economic issues, there's not much difference between as you said, Dems and GOP, right? They're offering same neoliberal policies with slight differences at the margins. And that's where it seems like the working classes have deserted Democratic Party and moved towards Trump. So, and what do you think whether within this economic order, the logics of neoliberalism, will American working classes get some sort of relief from Trump presidency in terms of economic policies?
Well, I mean, the slight difference was that, Kamala Harris was talking about providing more relief to the middle classes, right? Like with childcare and tax credits and thinking about, the affordability of medicine. Whereas President Trump, I mean, his idea is basically to apply tariffs to, take the manufacturing sector to new heights by incentivizing local manufacturing using big business. and giving like, sweeping tax credits, which will again benefit big business much more than they will benefit the ordinary workers. So, I do not place much hope in in the long run, the worker getting ordinary, average hardworking American citizen getting much relief within this system. I mean, what needs to happen is a rethink at the broader political level. I think the political landscape is in dire need of reform within the US.
Yeah, makes sense. And I mean, in terms of the role of the diasporic communities in the US, we have seen that they have been more inclined to support Trump this time as compared to previous time. In particular, I'm talking about the Pakistan. They endorsed Trump. How do you see that move?
It's quite puzzling. I mean, because the diaspora here, many of them have not visited Pakistan. I mean, when one goes and visits people, of an older generation than us who travel to Pakistan less frequently, they seem to live in a space which is more sort of a land of their imagination than what the ground realities are. And they somehow seem enamored, particularly by Imran Khan, by the PTI, and they seem to feel that there's been, a grave injustice. And, these some of these people are very affluent. So, I mean, if you're a doctor in a small community, in a small town, you have direct access to a congressman. So they did achieve, actually, it was quite impressive to see a congressional hearing on Pakistan and on Pakistan's democratic process. It was not about Pakistan doing more in the global war on terror, which are the kinds of congressional hearings that used to happen post 9/11. Here was, a hearing around the democratic process, the last elections in Pakistan. But again, I mean, the US establishment, I mean, Donald Lu came into the congressional hearing and he said, of course, I did not, try to influence the electoral process in Pakistan. That in itself was an indication that the US is not gonna, take a very strong stance. I mean, they haven't taken a great stance when it comes to what's happened in India, what's been happening in India over all these years for a variety of other reasons, but they didn't take a great stance. I mean, in what's happened with Sri Lanka, what's happened in Bangladesh, all of these countries have had elections and have kind of political turbulence in their own ways. So the US right now is very China-centric. And thinking of containing Chinese influence. And with President Trump, we'll see much more of that, perhaps. We'll see it, it will play out much more blatantly and in a more transactional manner. So, with this, and despite the endorsement, we did not see President Trump really even mention Pakistan, in the lead up to the elections. So I think that was a sort of misplaced faith and a kind of a contradictory faith as well, because earlier the assertion was that there was American meddling, and now it's wooing American meddling into Pakistani politics. And this was the hope based on which Pak perhaps endorsed President Trump, but I don't frankly see him doing much, and I don't see much of a shift really in how the US and how the State Department and American foreign policy is going to play out specifically vis-a-vis Pakistan.
Yeah, as you pointed out, there are layers of contradictions here. And so you're suggesting we should not expect much difference in terms of foreign policy posture, at least in the case of South Asia and China from the new administration.
China, I think what we might, what we might expect is an intensifying competition. Because if you remember, when the Biden administration came in, it kind of articulated this 3C strategy. So it was like, and conflict was like the worst case scenario, but it was like more about competition and perhaps cooperation. We didn't really see much cooperation. I mean, President Biden and President Xi sort of spoke about climate cooperation, and there has been some discussion between them on this issue with the hot air balloon issue and, suspicion of America being spied upon by China. We saw a halt in that, but there's been a resumption on that front. But climate was perhaps the only issue where there was some semblance of cooperation. And we know that President Trump has very different views on climate, right? But even with the Biden administration, we didn't see significant progress on climate. So, I mean, I've been one of the people who's been writing about this in the think tank community, that a country like Pakistan, with its history of, having played a facilitative role in the detente, in the 1970s between China and the US, could now provide a green space for trying to address sort of some of the resilience related concerns around CPEC infrastructure, which could, and that greening of CPEC could provide an opportunity for greening perhaps BRI for China, and it would provide the US a neutral space to actually coexist and perhaps even cooperate with China, in countries where it is otherwise trying to either compete for Chinese influence, or it's trying to woo them, to push back against China. But I suspect that some of that is, going to unravel. And, with President Trump's idea, because he has to raise money from somewhere. So if he's going to like slash taxes too, including for big business, then he says that he's going to impose tariffs. So, I mean, tariffs, now there's a fear that, if tariffs are imposed on a phone, I mean, ultimately it's the consumer who's going to be paying those higher prices here in the US. But then there could be tit for tat, another tariff war. So with China, we might see an intensification of this. And, and then that, because of the ways in which the politics links with the economy, we might see an intensification of great power rivalry unfolding in South Asia. And it might impact Pakistan that way.
Now, this is a good segue into the next topic, which is the global implications of this election outcome. And how do you see politically and economically the impact of the Trump presidency in the global context, especially in the case of EU and beyond?
Well, I mean, already there's a lot of people, wondering what's going to happen with the situation in Ukraine. Also, of course, in the Middle East. I mean, those are complex topics in their own right. But will President Trump, does he have a relationship with President Putin where he can bring, that conflict to an end? What is that going to cost the Ukraine? Or will he completely, if he doesn't get a favorable response from President Putin, will he pull back support from Ukraine, and what that will imply for like the rest of NATO, the European countries, because he's often talked about Europe having to pay for its own strategic interests, and America is, taking on too much of a burden for that. So, there will be implications there. I mean, we have the new COP coming up. There's also already, while we on the one hand, because there isn't that uncertainty, I mean, the Dems are probably going, they're not going to create a ruckus. There's a lot of disappointment, but, we're not going to see lengthy court battles, and the markets are responding favorably. But if you look at sort of renewables, while there are people saying that renewables have their own logic, right, and they are going to ride through these tough times, but simultaneously you do see, sort of in terms of stock prices, like for wind turbines, etc., they are experiencing a downward trend given the election results. So this will have broader implications. And it's going to require a rethink within the American polity, that where do the Democrats go now? Do they try to inch more to the center, or do they rethink? Right? Do they have a serious rethink and try to move back left?
I mean, that's an important point to reflect upon, and I'm sure there will be a lot more discussions on this topic. Thank you so much, Ali, for your time. It was wonderful talking with you, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Until next time, this is Danish Khan signing off from Fiscal Focus at Dawn News English.